Just as the day was beginning to come to life in Tyneside, that strange, almost unexplainable feeling appeared, as if something was about to happen away from the public eye. It was that quiet sense only those who follow Newcastle closely recognize. The kind of sign that shows up when a big move is approaching but no one yet knows exactly what it is. One of those premonitions that leaves every supporter restless, wondering which piece might change the club's course. And in that initial moment, even before any news broke, you could already tell something significant was circling the corridors of St. James Park. It wasn't a headline, it wasn't a leak, but it felt like a major story was taking shape. By the way, if you keep up with the latest Newcastle news, do subscribe to the channel. It really helps keep our community informed and lets us keep this work going. During those hours of expectation, as supporters tried to gather clues, a number of curious details began to surface, linking to clubs that rarely engage in deep negotiations. On one side, a European giant locked in another intense title race in the Premier League. On the other, an ambitious club that refuses to take small steps. Gradually, small pieces of information created an atmosphere of mystery that only grew. What made it even more intriguing was that this wasn't a simple interest, the kind that appears every day in the English press. There were signs of something bigger, as if an unusual exchange was being put together behind the scenes. Manchester City and Newcastle United were working on eye-catching negotiations that could involve the signing of an exceptional midfielder for around £70 million. That story gained traction when outlets such as OneFootball confirmed City's desire to reignite their interest in Bruno Guimaraes and that a swap including goalkeeper James Trafford could be part of the package. This scenario became more compelling because it coincides with City fighting directly with Arsenal at the top of the table, just 4 points away, while preparing to face Newcastle at St. James Park shortly after the international break. The proximity between the clubs in this case goes beyond the pitch and extends into transfer room maneuvers. James Trafford's situation also adds further depth to the story. Newcastle had already tried to sign him last summer when he was still at Burnley, but City intervened and scuppered the deal. Now, with Gianluigi Donnarumma arriving at the Etihad, Trafford has become a backup again, reigniting the Magpies' interest in a fresh attempt. According to recent reports, Trafford is considered an important target for Newcastle, particularly because Nick Pope's contract is coming to an end. Even though Pope is a well-established name at the club, future planning indicates a younger option in goal will be an inevitable need. And that's precisely where this potential swap gains traction. Swaps between top-level clubs are rare in the Premier League, especially involving players in such different positions, but January is traditionally a difficult window for negotiations, and such moves can become clever solutions to satisfy both parties. So the idea of including Trafford as part of a deal for Bruno Guimaraes began to be seen as plausible by English analysts. It's worth remembering that when Newcastle bought Bruno Guimaraes, they inserted a £100 million clause to protect the player. However, that clause is no longer part of the contract, opening the door for clubs like City to approach again. Current market valuations place Bruno at around £70 million. It's exactly that figure that gets Guardiola excited. As reported by the Shields Gazette, the manager spared no praise, saying Bruno is an outstanding defensive midfielder, complete and extremely aggressive in duels. When a coach like Guardiola describes a player in those terms, it becomes clear there's real, strategic and lasting interest. Guardiola also made it clear that Bruno is the sort of player who fits perfectly into the club's project for the coming years. That further explains why City could be willing to invest heavily, either by including James Trafford in the deal or by adding significant cash to convince Newcastle to part with one of Eddie Howe's key swords at this point. It's worth noting that Bernardo Silva's future at City could drastically influence these moves. If Silva truly leaves the Etihad on a free, Bruno's arrival would be seen not merely as reinforcement but as a direct replacement. Since joining in 2022, Bruno Guimaraes has racked up impressive numbers for Newcastle: 170 appearances, 25 goals and 28 assists. At 28, he's in his physical and technical prime, central both to winning the ball back and to building attacks. So the idea that he could further elevate Manchester City isn't an exaggeration. At the same time, such a potential departure sets off alarm bells among Magpies supporters. Losing such an influential player would force the board into decisive action to avoid weakening the squad, the very kind of debate that fuels the transfer market, generating expectation, doubt and discussion among fans and pundits alike. If you follow every twist of this saga, it's well worth subscribing to the channel. That way you'll never miss the latest updates on negotiations, rumours and decisions that could directly affect Newcastle United's future. A swap involving Trafford could be the key to balancing the values. The goalkeeper, estimated at roughly £26 million, represents an attractive piece, especially when considering the future of the position. That would make the offer less heavy on City's finances while providing Newcastle with a young, promising replacement. Operations of this sort, despite their complexity, have occurred at other major European clubs and are typically viewed as strategic when both parties have different but compatible needs. For City, securing a creative, combative midfielder is an absolute priority. For Newcastle, strengthening the goal with a young talent could mean stability for years to come. For Newcastle supporters, the big question is, how do you replace someone so complete if the sale happens? A modern, aggressive, technical midfielder suited to the Premier League is not easy to find. The club knows any move would need to be extremely well planned. Another important point concerns the player's own wishes. Although Bruno has always shown affection for Magpies fans and respect for the club, it's no secret that playing under Guardiola would be a dream for many athletes. The Spaniard's style can amplify the talents of creative midfielders like few others. Even so, Newcastle are not ready to make things easy. According to multiple sources, including One Football and the Shields Gazette, the board intend to keep the squad's core as strong as possible. Bruno is at the heart of that core. All of this makes the negotiation highly unpredictable. Regardless of how this story unfolds, it's impossible to deny the impact these initial movements have already had. Newcastle fans find themselves split between hope, concern and curiosity, a mixture of emotions that makes English football so vibrant. So, before we keep following this case that promises to stretch over the coming days, do subscribe to the channel. Besides staying on top of everything, you'll greatly help our community grow and encourage the production of in-depth Newcastle United content. Here, you'll never be left in the dark. With so many variables involved, the question remains, what will the next step be? Will City step up the chase to secure Bruno in this window? Will Newcastle be willing to negotiate if Trafford is included? And how will the two clubs balance their own interests in such a delicate deal? What we can say with certainty is that this story is far from over. Over the next hours and days, new information should emerge, confirming or dismissing each detail being discussed behind the scenes. As always, we'll be here to bring everything with clarity, depth and responsibility, citing sources and analyzing the impact of each move on Newcastle United's future.